Morning. I thought I'd show you how I built this adapter for a General Motors automatic transmission. I used a powerglide because I had one to build this up. This is just an adapter plate that has the Chevy on one side, the Mitsubishi on the other side, and I use a Toyota starter. I used the 4-bolt system, but I added the extra bolt in case you had a second generation block so that it would still fit. The adapter plate simply fits right in place of the standard bell housing, and then I supply some bolts. I use the short bolts at the top, and the longer bolts go to the bottom. The threads for these bolts ought to be cleaned with a thread chaser before you stick this system in there. It's always a good idea to chase your threads before you assemble anything. And what I did was I got the wrong socket. Nothing really to it. You can see how close we called it up here. Now I've got this is the narrow block design. This also can be fit to the wide block. So then the next step is I had to create a crankshaft that would resemble what a Chevy was, because I wanted to use a Chevy flywheel. So I built this adapter. This is a hardened adapter. It's built out of 4330 material, and you ain't gonna break it. This is hardened exactly the same hardness as the crankshaft. And the way I did this was I built the flywheel side just like a manual transmission flywheel for the Mitsubishi, and then on the opposite side I put in the bolt pattern for the Chevrolet, and I elevated it high enough to clear the bolt heads for the Mitsubishi. Originally I made these too tight, and with experience I learned to make them a little looser. So they're within a thousandths. Now with the automatic transmission, did not come with a guide pin. Manual transmissions did. Well, the manual transmission flywheels had to be timed because they were balanced. There's no balance in these because the GM flywheel is a neutral balance. So there was really no need for the guide pin except for it's there on a manual transmission, so I put it in there and I made it loose so that I had it a flat surface without the ability to cock that coupler on there in any way. Then I was real worried about having that outer circle exactly the same as the outer circle of the flywheel, and I was trying to capture strength in there. Well, I couldn't capture any strength in there, and all it was to provide a guide to center. So I put about 1/1000ths in there so that this thing just slides on there and sits. Then originally I had used an automatic transmission flywheel bolt because the head was smaller and I could fit it inside these holes of that coupler. Well, I changed that because I wanted the wider head to capture more material to hold the coupler to the crankshaft, and it was a little bit longer, so that allowed more material in the bolt land, so I gained more strength there. I've had guys telling me that they've been ripping up torque converters. They put out so much power. So I wanted to make sure and build this strong enough that, yeah, you can bust a crank, but you ain't gonna bust my coupler. The old days, these bolts had a hard time getting centered and tapped in, and everything had to be pampered to make sure it was just right. This time it's kind of a pulled-up operation. I tried to make it as user-friendly as I could. So, get them all. Now on this deal, I use a Craftsman socket because it's a thin wall. You can use a snap-on socket. In the old ones you had to use the Craftsman, but in the new ones you can use a snap-on, 3/8 drive, to get in there. You can torque that to whatever the specs are. And now you can see that this is the whole Chevy operation here with a Chevy flywheel. Now these jaws here work just like a lathe. You got 6 jaws there to center this flywheel. That's all I wanted to do, is make a center on there. Once these bolts are in place, then there's no need for those fingers until I put the torque converter in. I use the short 5/8 inch ARP flywheel bolt for a standard Chevrolet. They're a standard 7/16 fine thread American. I wanted everything from this point on to be right out of a small block Chevrolet, because you can buy anything for a small block Chevrolet. And for this you need a 12-point socket. And there you have it. That's the whole adapter. Now the center is exactly where the front of the nose of the torque converter is going to set in. And when this transmission is brought up to this plate, you're going to have an 1/8 inch depth between this flywheel and the torque converter, so that you can slide the torque converter up and it fits into this hole. And then when you bolt the torque converter up to the flywheel, you no longer need these fingers. So they're just there for a guide. They're not any kind of stress. And a lot of guys ask me, they say, boy, can I put a T56 up there and just use a Chevy bell housing and a Chevy driveline? Well, kind of. Because I can't get the bolts in here, plus get a space in here to hold the pilot bearing, so that the pilot bearing can take stress. So that kind of blew that out of the water. Hello? Originally, what I did is I bought a Chevy starter out of Jegs. They're about 150 bucks, something like that. But they came with a different front end on here, and I had to build an adapter to make it fit my plate. And this was the adapter set up like this. And you could clock it around. You could change the location of the starter. And then you had to use these little Allen bolt heads to mount the starter to the plate. Well, that was kind of fun. But the problem was you had these 2 little Allen bolt holes holding on that whole starter. So I looked at it, and I could not tell the difference between this starter and a Toyota starter from a 22RE. The only thing I had to worry about was the gear, because this was a GM gear. Well, I found those gears for $15 in Jegg's catalog, and they were supplied as replacement gears for these reduction gear starters. So I took the Toyota apart and just took this gear out of here and exchanged it with this gear, and that spline was exactly the same. So I wound up buying just these little starter gears for 15 bucks. You take a C-clip out of there, pull that off and put the new one on, and you got a Chevy starter. So these starters grow all over the place, and the really nice part about it is I had a predictable flange that was nice and solid, and took a 10mm bolt instead of that small Allen screw, and I thought this was a much better deal. So then I had to measure the depth and get that squared away. I'll show you how I did that. This pocket was recessed down in here for the starter, and there's one bolt hole for the bell housing that's very close, but it clears. You'll notice that I put steel inserts in all these so that there's no problems with how they hold up. This is part of the starter. This is the Toyota starter, and you can see it fits in that pocket perfectly. And I use a couple of 10mm Allen screws. Could be regular bolts, could be the starter bolts. These are all done with metric on the metric side and standard on the standard side. And if I get that down in there. It's not all that close, but it's in there. This starter clears the stock manifolds, the intake manifolds, and any other kind of intake manifold you might have. That's just the gear body. The reason I did that is I'll show you how I lined everything up. This major hole here is what really locates the starter in here. And you've got the standard 150 3-tooth flywheel, and I got the Jegg's little gear in here. And I can reach in and I can imitate how that starter fits up in there, and then I can rock it. I put about 30 thousandths in there so that I got a nice fit. It retracts real nice. Everything works real well. The other thing I like to do is I like to check the flywheel for run out. And what I need to know is whether it runs out up and down or if it runs in and out this way. You're going to get a little run out until you get the torque converter squared up, but this thing is perfect. All the alignment is in here, and the fact that it has a flat square surface is what makes all this work. You can check this just kind of out of the naked eye of how solid, soft, or square that is. I can check it with a dial indicator, but it all goes out once you put the torque converter up. So now if I did everything right and everything looks good, this is just a standard powerglide GM transmission, and this nose of this torque converter is going to fit up inside these fingers for just the center. spin the torque converter a little bit, make sure I got a good fit. And just because I'm showing off, I'll just use a couple C-clamps here. Spin that all up in there. I like to keep that converter spinning. And that's it. Now, according to General Motors, I need an 1/8 inch free travel inside that torque converter, and I can't show it to you, but I can guarantee you it's there. Put your shifter on and go, man. Boogity, boogity, boogity. Couple of nice little close features. You can see how tight the fit is. Doesn't get any closer than that. This little piece right here just fits right inside there, just like downtown. And the starter fits in there. There's the original intake manifold. Let's see if I can get a little closer here. The starter fits in there. You can't really see it that well. The light doesn't do well. But it fits right down inside there. Nice and clear of the intake manifold. And you'll see that the 1 bolt for the starter for the bell housing comes in is fairly close, but it fits fine. There's a steel insert in there. So that completes the tour. What you've got now is everything from this adapter plate bag is all stuff you can buy right out of Jegs for small block Chevrolet. Stall converters, transmissions, anything you want for this little motor goes in there, and it's cheap, it's new, you can buy it anywhere. So make some power and have some fun, but don't get hurt. Thanks.